live in 3, 2, 1, live.
Hello, welcome to the Glasgow 2024 Neurodiversity panel. I'm David Green. With me is an amazing cast. I think cast is the best way to say it, cast of authors to talk to you about work in practice, challenges and opportunities that they have, and just every day of being a writer and being neurodivergent. Just before we start, there's a couple of things that we just need to kind of go through for housekeeping wise. Anyone that's in the webinar with us, there is a Q&A function if you want to ask any questions, and we will get to those towards the end of the panel. So keep on, if anything pops into your head at any time and you want to ask something, a burning question, just get it in there. Anyone that's on YouTube, add your comments in there as well, and they will be brought into us so we can get to those too. From our lovely tech person, which is the wonderful PS Livingston today. If you are tweeting or watching along this, if you use the hashtag Glasgow 2024, and we can pick those up as well, and we can retweet them. But with all that in mind, we do have a code of conduct for the people on the panel and people in the webinar and on YouTube. We have a zero tolerance policy on racism, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, homophobia, transphobia. Anyone behaving inappropriately will be removed. It's a one strike and you're out policy on that. So best behavior, please, and everyone be kind. So with that said, thank you all for coming on to the panel. We've been really, really excited. We've been planning this for quite some time. Everyone is going to introduce themselves in a little while, but I'm just going to talk about the panel itself. So neurodiversity describes the idea that people experience and interact with the world around them in many different ways. There is no right way of thinking, learning, behaving, and differences are not viewed as deficits. As more understanding comes to light and more neurodivergent people discuss their experiences, the world understands more, science fiction and fantasy included. So I'm David Green. I am autistic. I am also a writer of fantasy. And we're going to be talking about how neurodiversity helps and sometimes hinders our process with CM Caplan, Ada Hoffman, Jason Sanford and Maya MacGregor in their craft, representation in our genres, and what challenges we face. So thank you for joining us. So if we want to start with Jason, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Sure. Jason Sanford. I'm a science fiction and fantasy author. I've written a number of short stories published in Asimov's Ender Zone and other magazines. My first novel, Plague Birds, came out, I guess it's about a year ago. Just over a year ago. I've been a finalist for multiple Nebula Awards, Philip K. Dick Award, and other stuff. I'm on the autistic spectrum. I have what they used to call Asperger's. I also have ADHD, so I get and it does inform a lot of my writing. I'll talk about that more.
Thanks for coming on. Connor, how about yourself?
I'm CM Caplan. I wrote The Sword in the Street, which was a finalist of Mark Lawrence's contest, self-published fantasy blog off. And then last November, I published The Fall Is All There Is, which is a post-apocalyptic science fantasy book about royal quadruplets and things like that. And I'm autistic, I have OCD, ADHD, a couple different anxiety disorders, and probably a couple other things that I'm forgetting at the moment.
Maya, we'll go with you next, please.
Hello, my name is Maya MacGregor. My pronouns are they, them. I am an autistic and also very anxious author of mostly fantasy for adults and young adults. I have a cat who's probably about to make an appearance because I can see her coming. Yep, there she is. This is Tara, and this is her tail, Duchess McFlufferson. She's decided to wake up from her nap. They love the Zoom. I was diagnosed late in life. I self-diagnosed around 29 with autism, and then was formally diagnosed a couple of years ago. I am probably most known right now for my YA paranormal mystery, The Many Half-Lived Lives of Sam Sylvester, which is I'm doing that just so my blurred background doesn't cut it off, but which has an autistic protagonist, and I'm the author of, oh God, I think about 20 other books under various pen names. I also write as Emmy Mears, Sylvie Greenhart, M.E. MacGregor. My work's been published at Tor.com and Uncanny Magazine, and I also am hybrid, so I self-publish and write a lot and just sort of yeet it out there. So, yeah.
Yeet it out there. That's the way to do it, isn't it? It's done. Get out of here. Ada, on to you, please.
Okay, so my name is Ada Hoffman. I am on the autism spectrum, as well as I have some other stuff I'm not public about. I am the author of the Outside trilogy of cosmic horror, space opera novels, and the third book in the trilogy is coming out from Angry Robot next week. A week from today is the launch date. So in addition to that, I also for the past 10 years have run a review series called Autistic Book Party, where I talk about autistic representation in science fiction and fantasy.
Excellent. Well, thank you for joining us, and good luck with our book launch next week as well. Very excited.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone on the panel, and thank you everyone who's watching on YouTube and on the webinar for joining in. So we're going to get cracking on with the questions. So anyone who's watching, obviously you can join in. You can ask us your questions as well. Q&A is the best place for that because they pop up for us straight away. But please ask on YouTube as well. So the first question that I have for us all to kind of talk about today is, I thought I'd start off with kind of a gentle one, because obviously these kind of, we can go quite into a lot of depth in general, but especially on these kind of questions. So we all read as well as write, and I thought what would be nice to kind of talk about at the start would be neurodiverse representation in sci-fi fantasy that stands out to you in a positive way. So if anyone wants to start off with that, if anyone's got something that's burning the mind straight away and wants to start with it, please jump in.
I'll start.
So one of my, oh, sorry, you can go.
Go ahead.
So one of my favorite neurodiverse books is one that actually just came out in the past year, which is called The Unbalancing by R.B. Lemberg. And it's in this birdverse setting that RB just puts a whole bunch of their different writing into this universe, but it's the first novel that they've ever released in this universe. It's about trying to avert a climate disaster, and there's these two main characters, and one of them is autistic. And what is wonderful to me about this particular book is just the amount of thought that just goes into how the two characters with such different neurotypes work together, and how such, respect is given to the autistic character's needs, including needs that you don't often see in science fiction books, like the need to slow down and think for a bit, before you go on, when there's, most people wouldn't slow down and think because there's a crisis happening, but that's what they need. And I thought just the way that was done was really impressed me.
Mary, you got one, yeah.
Oh, one of my more recent reads was The Death of Jane Lawrence by Caitlin Starling, which is a gothic horror with an autistic protagonist, and that one was just, I don't know, I've read so many books over my life, and finding autistic characters has always been sort of a really guesswork in terms of that. So having a character who the author has explicitly said is autistic was really nice to just feel like I could sink into the story. And I love gothic fiction in general, so the atmosphere was amazing, and also just seeing the way that the protagonist approaches things felt very natural to me, and I could relate a lot to that. Another one that's much older, I think probably one of the first times I think I encountered an autistic character in science fiction fantasy was probably Meg in A Wrinkle in Time, which I don't think she's explicitly supposed to be autistic, but she reads very autistic, and to me, I really related to her, and when I go back and read it, I'm like, So but most recently I've definitely The Death of Jane Lawrence, and then I am partway through An Unkindness of Ghosts by River Solomon as well right now. So
Yeah, it's nice when you find something that you can relate to as well. You know, when there's real kind of kinship with a character like that. Jason, Connor, anything stand out for you?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I do want to what Ada said about R.B. Lindbergh's The Unbalancing. I was going to mention that actually. Lindbergh's birdverse stories are highly neurodiverse, including the Four Profound Waves. And again, what you just said about the unkindness of ghost. I did want to mention Ada's The Outside, wonderful series. And, you know, this is kind of in some ways different, but even though it's not explicitly written like this, the Murderbot Diaries by Martha Wells, I kind of read, you know, it's kind of, I read it that way as a neurodivergent, you know, even though it's not written that way. And I love it it hits home so greatly.
Connor, over to you.
You stole mine. I was going to say the Murderbot Diaries. That was actually one of my favorites. I really enjoy stuff where it's sort of like the first few examples that came to mind were like Song of Achilles or Swords Point, where it's just like you've got like a character. It's just explicitly stated they've got something going on, but I kind of like when it's a little bit open to interpretation. There are a couple different approaches I enjoy, but I really like when it's like there's something happening here, but we don't quite know what it is, and in that way it can sometimes be like less stereotypical than some depictions, and it can lead to like layering that into a character rather than that being the only thing about a character. More recent example, which I don't think was intended or explicitly stated, would be I think Angela Board released a book called Through Dreams So Dark, which is just a brilliant book, and the main character is going to a clinic for a psychiatrist, but it's got a bunch of like Cold War related spy stuff going on with the clinic and everything, and it's never explicitly stated that he's neurodivergent, but you can just see like this is a messed up dude who's got a lot of stuff just happening in his brain. And there are a lot of characters who are like that in different ways, and I really like the way that a lot of it, like there's a lot of neurodiversity, at least it read that way to me, like just sort of blending together, and it was really cool to see.
Yeah, because it's interesting, especially with fantasy books, because sometimes there may not be that kind of, you know, understanding or terms for you know, neurodivergent people in those books. So you have to kind of get around it in a way where it's like showing and not telling, and showing it through character and how they kind of interact with other people, which is you see it a lot more these days, which is great to see. Which brings to the other side of the coin. Obviously, we've seen a lot of negative representation and poorly handled, particularly in movies, TV shows, and where there has to be some kind of shorthand. Is there anything that kind of stands out to you all into where it's you really just don't take to it, or it's a negative, has a lot of like, you know, negative connotations, and why in particular for these ones? If you want to start with Ada again, we might as well go around that way.
You know, I mean, if you go to my website, if you search for Autistic Book Party, you can find some specific examples of books I've read that I'm like, not this one. But like, I don't like singling people out, like calling them out specifically, but I can name some particular like tropes and like tones in stories that I run across frequently and I really don't like. And one of my least favorite is when, you know, there's an autistic character in the story, or maybe they're diagnosed, maybe they're just like, you know, coded, they have autistic mannerisms, but either way, like there's some books where this character appears, and every time the character appears, like the narrative just starts going on and on about like how annoying they are and how tired everyone is of them and how saintly they are for putting up with them. And I'm just like, shut up, go away. Is that what you think of me?
Yeah, I've read a few like that as well. I think I know what you mean. Maya, how about you?
I think that there's I think that's similar to that is the sort of just hyper stereotypical depiction of autism as people who cannot interact socially, who like it's really deficit based as well as really specifically sort of I don't really like calling out specific things very much, but I will say the show Atypical, I watched the trailer for it and I couldn't finish watching the trailer because I was just like, nope, not doing this. So I think for me, especially because there's such a diagnosis disparity between particularly cis white men and everyone else, that sort of anything that sort of reinforces that is what autism looks like always is something that sort of gets under my skin, because there's a lot that does not fit that experience, and even clinicians are not fully versed in it, and it can be quite frustrating when I see stuff like that. It's hard for me to want to engage with it when I feel othered by something that's supposed to be about me. So
I understand. That's a great point. And Jason?
It's always irks me greatly. I have trouble naming I don't want to name and shame, so to speak, but it's kind of the one thing that always irks me is that kind of the Rain Man stereotype of the autism or being on the spectrum as the superpower. This gives you the ability to do this. It's got these deficits, but and I'm thinking, it's just, again, it's called a spectrum for a reason, because it's a whole range. And, we don't do that to other people. We don't, neurotypicals don't get, told, well, this behavior of yours is your superpower and this is your, kryptonite, that kind of thing. And so that really greatly irks me. And the fact that people don't understand about the masking and I because of my personal background, I am really, really good at masking for limited times, if you know what I mean. For a few hours at that convention, I can mask, but then you're going to see, where did Jason go? He disappeared, and that's that. And it just, so that whole idea of it's the superpower. It's what, it's like, it's just, I see the world differently than many people, and that's okay. And I don't know, that just really bothers me, that when it's portrayed as the superpower.
The masking point is a great one. It's something that you don't actually see tackled in other than you're doing some books, especially these days. But in terms of like mass media, it's not something, and that's especially people that like myself and I know Maya were diagnosed later in life. Mm-hmm. We masked an awful lot growing up because we had to, right? Yeah. And then when we were trying to be ourselves, people were like, what's wrong with Dave? Why is he acting like this today? He's not himself. And I'm like, well, actually, I am myself today. And that's something that it's not, they never quite get right. The whole kind of struggle and everyday kind of process of that. Connor, how about yourself?
Well, the first thing that came to my mind was I think there was a release in 2019. I don't want to like name it or anything, but it was this book, I think, about a legal case where someone thought like a mother killed their autistic kid, but it was trying to like portray a sympathetic portrayal of this woman who thought like, well, maybe he's at peace now and everything, and because autistic children make their parents' lives miserable and only death can bring peace to their caretakers and everything. And it was shockingly well received. It was insane. Really? Like, I'll still stumble into positive press about it every now and then. I'm just like, God damn, what? How? And even outside of that, there's like that's just the one sort of like book where it's just sort of like that sticks out to me. Anytime I have a question, like I answer a question like this, but more broadly, I think there's still like a huge problem of especially with antagonists getting like all of everything they do excuses, like, well, they're crazy, so it doesn't matter, like they just don't understand how people work and that's why they're evil or something. And it's just so thoroughly baked into so many genres, and it's it's like on some level I kind of get it, because but on another level it's like trying to extricate like anti-Semitic stereotypes out of some fantasy creatures. Like these things have been buried in here, like they're centuries deep. They're kind of stuck, and it can be sort of frustrating to try and like tinker with that, you know.
Some of them are very well worn and well trod, aren't they? And if you go a different way, people think this isn't the way to do it. But it's like, well, there's a reason we want to try and do it in a different way. So as we turn to talking about work and the creative process, I'd like to know, like, you know, if there is anything about your unique identities that helps you with your work in any kind of way. I put as an example when I sent you all the question that I have like a real laser focus sometimes, which is actually, I have to set alarms on around me to kind of like go off, so I actually stop working, otherwise I'd just be gone for hours. That can help me when I'm working, but it also can hinder me as well in general life. So we'll start with you again, Ada. Is there anything about your unique identity that helps with your creative process?
Well, you know, I saw this in like the pre-panel email when we were going over the questions, and I wasn't quite sure like how I would position myself in terms of a question like this, because I mean, absolutely, some of my writing projects become my special interests, and it's like I'm thinking about this all the time. I gotta write it, you know, and that sometimes that makes me more productive, but sometimes the writing that's my special interest is like, oh, I want to write this fanfic now, or like, oh, I want, like, sometimes it's completely out to like it. I think a lot, well, what neurotypical people don't always understand about having a special interest related to your work is like, it's not a power you really consciously control. Like, it will go where it wants to. So I'm like, I think rather than giving me an advantage, it's just a different way of my creative impulses working. I don't know.
Right. I know exactly, but my special interest is maps. So whenever I start thinking about geography, I'm derailed for days. It's gone. The working day is gone. Connor, how about you? How would you think about this question?
If you were to write about a character who did what I do, I feel like I'd be labeled bad representation because it's so stereotypically organized. It's even from a structural standpoint, I will like start off with like a one sentence summary of every chapter I can think of, from the beginning to end, and then I just balloon it out to like a Wikipedia summary of each chapter, and then I just bullet point by bullet point, like, here's what happens in they move across the room, here's a little bit of rudimentary dialogue, and like the outline ends up being like 30 to 40,000 words, and then the first draft is just filling in those gaps. And then in a more sort of like nuts and bolts kind of way, a lot of the time I create very unusual, or at least I've heard I create very unusual sentences. They make sense to me at the time, but like I a lot of the time look at words as a kind of like empathetical data. It's all of it is solving the math equation. It's just trying to find the right thing with the right like cultural connotations for whatever I need to evoke. And so every time I'm drafting it, it does sort of feel like solving a math equation.
Right, that's interesting. So it's just you look at it in you know, it's like a real process of building out this
yeah,
story.
it's like a puzzle.
Yeah, puzzle. Right. Interesting. Maya, how about you?
I think I'm somewhat similar to Ada in the sense that, like, a lot of the time what I'm working on becomes my special interest, and I just started talking and the cat looked up at me, so I'm gonna put her just doing that face. So I know for me, I definitely get really into hyper focus, and which is, I think, in my mind, a blessing and a curse, because I sometimes will pull massive word days and finish books really, really quickly, and I draft quite cleanly. I'm a copy editor as well, so I tend to come up with quite clean first drafts, and a lot of the process of me figuring out a book happens internally. And then by the time I'm ready to sit down, I call myself a volcano writer, so I need the magma to sort of build up before it erupts and a book happens. But it also is quite difficult because if I get derailed by something, like if there's something that's interrupting my routine, my process, like whether it's knocks at the door, noises I can't control out with my flat, all those different things, then it can get really, really difficult for me to get back in meltdown status at sometimes as well. So I find that it's much better for me now that I'm just, you know, full-time writer, editor at home, because I can mostly control my environment, but then the few times when I can't, it gets really distressing. And then in terms of like other things, I definitely go deep dive special interest. Language is one of my special interests. So whether it's conlanging my way through an epic fantasy, or I'm a fluent Gaelic speaker, so utilizing Gaelic in what I'm writing, I tend to get really, really into those things, and sometimes get so into them that I stop drafting and I'm just playing with words. So
I'll have to bring you on next time I need to create a language, because I'm terrible with language. I will have to bring you on within reason, because I don't want to take up all your time. Jason, how about you?
Well, yes, I have. I'm with everyone on the hyper focus, which as Maya was just saying, it can be if it can be difficult to get into that if I don't have everything set up right, and which can delay my writing, but once I'm in it, it's great. Another thing is, like, going back to what I mentioned about masking, I'm really good at masking. So that gives me, you know, I'm out there observing people and really seeing, oh, it's like I just watch the world and I'm like, wow, y'all don't realize what you're doing. But then all that works its way into my fiction, because, you know, as I try to understand, it's like because of how I function, I had to basically understand the world to function in it. And I just go around doing that all the time. So I'm always spinning stories based on everything I'm seeing, and because I'm trying to process the world and it spins its way into the stories. But when I'm actually trying to write a story, my process is pretty simple. The first sentence or the first few words of the story come to me, and that's really got to be where I start with. The language there is really ringing into me, and then from that I do the world building and bring everything into it and try to build it out. So, but it's, for me, starting a story is very language focused. And as for my special interest, I'm fortunate. When I was young, I almost gave up, but what saved me was the science fiction and fantasy genre. So my special interest is science fiction and fantasy, and comics and manga and anime and all that. But all of that is what saved me. And so that's my special interest. And now I get to write in it, and it's like, it's all around good.
That's great. That's great to hear. And that's funny. Mel Grabbin in the chat wondered if a working process can be a special interest, and it definitely can be. The whole writing, the thing that we do, like, you know, the hobby that we have and the career that we have is definitely something will be a special interest for a lot of people. So on to the next question. We'll talk more about kind of the challenges that we can kind of face when we are trying to. I know a few of you have touched on it on some of those things already, and not just about the actual writing process, and this one about the kind of navigating the industry, because again, as one of the examples that I brought up for me, platforms such as like Discord, where there's a lot of information that is constantly happening, I find quite overwhelming, and it's hard to kind of keep up with it. And so it's like, unless someone tags me, I'm going to ignore this for a few days and miss all kinds of important things, and then have to go back through it all, everything like that. So I actually quite like the tag everyone thing, because I'm like, I've seen this. I do it all the time. It's good. So there's lots of little things that can kind of be a bit tricky to navigate. So Connor, if we can start with you, what kind of challenges do you face, either for your creative process or just, you know, navigating the writing world?
I think it's really feast or famine as far as focus goes. Like especially early on, either I'll be like posting 5,000 or 10,000 words a day, or I'll just be getting like chipping away at like 1,000, just slowly, trying to just trudge through it. And I can, and like it's like one of those things where you write like 3 sentences, and it's like, oh, what's happening on Twitter, like that kind of thing. And then like it's one of those things where it's like, well, I hope the hyper focus is showing up soon, because this is taking longer than I thought. If it starts taking too long, I end up getting like really demotivated, because it's sat in the first draft for too long and I can't make it good yet. It's also very difficult getting interrupted or anything, or having to do anything else. Like there's always a bit of an inertia behind whenever I get going or something, when I'm writing something. So it's like I'll be writing something and someone will ask me if I can go do something, even if it's really quick. I'm still drafting in my head as I go do it, so that can lead to like either being forgetful with whatever I need to do, or just frustrated because I'm like, I need to get back to what I was doing before. I didn't get to finish before I shifted gears. And the only other thing I think of is just networking in general can be tricky to navigate, just the social or professional nature and where that line is. So usually it helps to have a couple like trusted friends that you can like go and check in advance, or like ask after something, like when you say something, you're like, was I okay there? Was that, did I cross any lines? Are we good? That's usually how I navigate things, just having to rely on other people to be like, am I good? Are we good? You know?
There's a couple of people that regularly get messages from me saying, what did this person actually mean when they said this? Like, you know, what does it, like, I think they're just being polite. Are you sure? Because we've been down this road before. I'm not sure what, I think there's something hidden behind this. I think, no, they're being polite. It's fine. Ada, how about you?
Seconding everything about networking being difficult. And for me, one of the things that makes networking difficult is I find it extremely difficult to initiate a social interaction. I mean, it's something I'm working on, but it's really like the few times I have had success with meeting people in the industry and networking on what's not, it's because someone else like kind of took me under their wing. It was like, here, why don't you join this little, Discord or whatever. I'm like, okay. But when people are like, oh, I like going to this convention because then I go and I meet people and I make friends, and I'm like, you do? Huh? That's not what I do at a convention. I go and I appear on my panels, and then I've been in this career for more than a decade, and I still don't know how it works.
We'll figure it out one day, maybe. Who knows? You're doing great though, so just keep doing
thanks.
what you're doing. So it's all good. Jason, how about you?
What Ada just said about trying to understand how the genre and book publishing works, that's something I encountered a lot earlier in my career, and I was like, people, and it would drive me up the wall that there's all these unspoken things and missing stairs that you're supposed to understand without anyone telling you. And I'm like, oh, it's like, oh, that editor will do this, and that publisher, oh, you don't want to go near them, and all that kind of stuff, which is actually, so that's one. Also, in addition to my fiction writing, I report on the science fiction and fantasy genre with my genre grapevine. And that's one reason is it was so frustrating to me earlier in my career that I didn't, I would go to a convention and I didn't understand what was going on, and I don't want someone else to go through that, so I said, well, now I write my column, but even in some ways, my column is still me trying to understand the genre, if you want to get down to it. So, but that's, and I can't tell you how many times I've gone to convention and just, flubbed stuff, and I'm like, I finally, I think I've gotten to the point where I'm good with, okay, well, you screwed that up, just move on. You know what I mean? But it took me a long time to get there, and it is what it is. But yeah, networking, meeting people. Yeah, I love people, and I like being around people, but it just, I can only do it for little bits of time, and I can only, and then I'll probably spend 2 days dissecting what I did wrong. you know.
And decompressing as well, because I don't know about you all, but whenever I have to go to so I can be forced to go to like go to this thing. Whenever I go to a convention or even Christmas, which we just had there, where there's lots of people around, that need just to go away for a little while and just be on your own, just do something that you enjoy. Again, is something that I don't think comes up a lot of time in character work in a lot of these things. But as people in these kind of situations, I think that's something that neurotypical people don't understand. It's like, we're not being rude, or we're not being like, you know, arrogant or whatever. It's like, we literally just need to go and be on our own for a little while, because our heads are spinning from the state of what's been going on. It's a really tricky one to kind of to get around, I think. Maya, how about you?
Yeah, I'm really on board with what everyone else has said. I think in terms of difficulties, I'm in a place right now where I've got 2 books I'm writing, and one's for serialization. I had to just put it on hiatus with the company that bought the rights, because I'm so overwhelmed with how much I have to do, that I'm having that inertia problem where I can't start anything, but it's that feedback loop of like, have so much to do, can't start, feel shame, oh my god, there's still so much to do, and it just sort of goes around and around in that loop. And in terms of, yeah, I find networking completely baffling as well. I manage it, but at the same time, like, the sensory aspect of so much of networking happens in pubs and BarCon and all of these different things, that when I am trying to do that, I might think something's going a certain way and be completely wrong later. And so or I get really overwhelmed and I can't actually hear or understand what anyone's saying. So I end up just feeling very like sort of rabbit in the headlights all night. And I think that's something that's quite difficult. And I do need a lot of recharge time. I've started sort of making it a thing where most of the time I will now just get my own room, even if I find the expense a bit much. Like, if I can't afford it, I just often won't go, just because I need to have that space where I can retreat, and I know that no one else is going to be there, so I can just, you know, go into my cocoon and stay there for a wee bit. Because I've had a lot of similar sort of social experiences where I mean, I don't really, I think, put my foot in my mouth too much, but I tend to go silent and I go non-speaking when I can't, when I'm overstimulated on a sensory level. And I've gotten, you know, feedback from people saying that I am cold, or that I'm rude, or that I was disengaged or uninterested in anything anyone was saying, or I talk too much because someone taps a special interest and then I, you know, go rambling. So I do find that really, really difficult, and I do much better in a situation where I am like I can do a panel where someone's asking me questions. I'm expected to answer certain questions, and I can do talks and stuff like that. I find that a lot easier. But when it comes to actually trying to navigate lots of moving pieces at once in environments where there's noise happening, and that gets really, really difficult for me.
Yeah, I'm with you on a lot of that, especially the surprise special interest mentioned. And it's just like, hang on a second, somebody wants to know something that I'm interested in.
Did someone say Gaelic? What?
Half an hour later, no one was actually interested in what I wanted to talk about. Pam says, Maya, that you are 100% amazing and lovely, and I would agree. So we have before we go on to some of the questions that the last couple of questions that I have for you all, we have had some questions in from the Q&A and YouTube. So maybe we might deal with those ones first before finishing off, and gives people a chance to pop in with any more questions as well in the meantime. So I think this is more of a writing question from Mel Grebin. So she wants to know, and we are going to touch on this one a little bit in the questions that I have as well. But they are just looking at how to get getting across an autistic character in their writing. You know, what kind of you've all mentioned tropes before with ones to avoid and ones to but obviously there are touchstones that people need. We've talked about them, what a lot of people like us kind of share. So how would you go about building, if you are looking at doing creating an autistic character? How do you go about building an autistic character? And we'll start with Jason on that one.
Sometimes, well, I'll be honest. A lot of my writing up till now, I would write autistic or characters on the spectrum and not reveal it. To be quite honest, I just my novel Plague Birds is a neurodivergent novel, but I don't ever come out and explicitly state the main character is neurodivergent or on the spectrum. And because in some ways I wanted to, it was tied in with what I mentioned about masking and all that kind of stuff. And but then that said, I'm working on a new novel, which is going to be very explicit about it. Space opera where it's going to be a central part of the plot and of the characters, lives is going to be, it's known, if you know what I mean. So I don't think you always have to reveal it. I mean, there's that. But I mean, I guess it's kind of hard to say because it depends upon the story, I guess, is what I'm hedging around and jumping around at. If you've got a story where it's, sometimes you can come out and say it. Sometimes you can just, let the reader find out. For example, River Solomon's book, Space Opera, I'm trying to remember. I don't think it's explicitly stated, but from the mannerisms and just how the story goes and how the character interacts, you understand it.
You're talking about Unkindness of Ghosts. They don't use the word autism, but they do use, like, at one point a word that's specific to the setting.
Exactly.
Because sometimes you'll have that happen that, you're in the far future or you're in a secondary world, mm-hmm. and they have a different way of thinking of it and a different word.
Oh, exactly. That's what, yeah, exactly. And I thought it worked wonderfully in River Solomon's book. So I wish I could give it a definitive answer. It depends upon the story, like so many different things, and with all this.
Maya, how have you got any tips or any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think that probably most of my protagonists are autistic, because I write a lot based on how I experience the world, and that makes sense that I would write mostly autistic protagonists for that reason. But in terms of being explicitly autistic, Sam in my YA was the first, like, explicitly autistic character I wrote, and Sam just sort of outright says it, like, right, quite quickly within the book. And the next book that I'm doing with Astra is called the Evolving Truth of Ever Stronger Will, and I wanted to write a character who hasn't been diagnosed. So with Will, it's a lot more of, how they react to things and how couching it very much in my experience, so I know that other autistic people will read it and be like, right, yes, I see this. But there are also lots of other aspects sort of intersecting with it. So I think what Jason said was bang on. It really depends on the setting. Both of these are contemporary, sort of paranormal YA, but in my second world settings and stuff, it's more vague. Like, it's just a sense of, I've got a character who might talk about sensory input being too much or something, right, like that. But you can use those sorts of things of just how autistic people experience the world to communicate, like, across and similar experiences. So people, when they touch on those things, you might get people who miss it, of course, but the people you maybe want to catch it will catch it. So
yeah, if you know, you know.
Yeah, if you know, you
know. Connor, how about you? Any input on this one?
I like the idea of usually, at least for me, I've only got the 2 books out, but both of them have like an explicit mention of a POV character who is autistic or has some kind of neurodivergence. There are some, but then there are some side characters who are just like either undiagnosed, so I had to do a lot of implying, or just having to find some kind of workaround. And usually just to echo what was already said, it's a focus on like the symptoms, the kind of ways that these people experience the world. I actually just had to introduce an autistic character to my work in progress yesterday, and I was like, I've never seen an introduction with like auditory processing disorder. Let's try that. And sort of through that, and there's like a couple different noises going on. You couldn't figure out which one was coming from where. And it's usually that kind of thing can be just a good little Easter egg for the kinds of people who need to see that sort of thing.
Yeah, and it's nice. It's nice for people that are like that to read characters and to see themselves and to see that characters like them are the protagonists of books and protagonists of fiction, because it's nice to see it, isn't it? Right. Ada, how about you?
I don't really have a lot to add to what everyone else already said. It really it depends. I mean, it depends on the story is the correct short answer. And if you want to elaborate on that, it's like, you know, what type of experiences does this autistic person have? Do they, you know, what type of environment are they from? What amount of knowledge do they have about themselves? And about, you know, do they understand, like Maya was saying, do they understand that they're autistic, or are they someone who is undiagnosed and still figuring it out? And do they live in, you know, a different universe where people think about these things differently? And also a thing to think about is why is this character autistic? And I mean, that's not to say you have to have some like big like purpose, like it doesn't always have to be like a political purpose or like a big statement, or like, you know, the story doesn't have to hinge on it. That's not what I'm saying, but like, just think about what your motivation is, because sometimes it's just like, I want to see a person like me as the protagonist in this story, or I want to see a person like, you know, my brother or my friend. And sometimes it's like, well, I want to talk about, you know, this specific experience that I've had, like this sensory experience, like Connor was saying, auditory processing, you know, this specific feeling I have, which is connected to my experience of autism, is what I'm expressing in the story, you know, or sometimes it's something completely different. And so depending on what that reason is, you might serve that reason better by describing it in one way or another.
Excellent question and excellent answer. Thanks for that question, Mel. We have a question from I'm really bad at butchering people's names. I apologize in advance. I think it's Ed Beaker. I think I'm very sorry if it's not. Has anyone on the panel read Lave of Heaven?
Yes.
Oh yes.
So the question, and you two can discuss this until the cows come home if you like, from Ed is, would the Lave of Heaven would be considered, would you say the Lave of Heaven would be considered an example of the main character being challenging?
Well, what do you mean by challenging?
Ed does not say. So
okay.
I mean, I suppose I've not read this book, unfortunately, but you know, is there something about the main character that stands out in some kind of way, or?
Well, I'm just trying to think, because okay, so the plot of the Lave of Heaven, I'm assuming we mean the book by Ursula K. Le Guin and not some other book that has the same title. But it's about a guy who his dreams come true, and so he meets this kind of evil psychiatrist who tries to start like changing the world by controlling his dreams. And so it's very much a book about like power dynamics and people like trying to instrumentalize each other when that's not appropriate. And then it goes into like Le Guin's beliefs about Taoism and going with the flow, and it's very complicated. But I don't know, like I wrote a poem about this book which appeared in an anthology of poems in honor of Le Guin, so that's why I'm like, oh, I can talk about this. But I have to say, when I was reading it, I didn't specifically get autistic vibes from the main character, which doesn't necessarily mean he isn't, because sometimes I miss things. But I did, you know, that kind of the dynamic where a therapist or a person in power is like just overruling your wishes. That's something I'm sure a lot of autistic people can unfortunately relate to. But then I'm trying to figure out how the word challenging plays into this, because I really, someone's in the chat.
Yeah.
Indeed, characters can be seen as challenging when it's how they interact with the world. That's what they said in the chat. Maybe, I don't know. Okay, I'm going to stop talking now.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think I read the novel. And of course, I read it a long time ago, I must be honest, and did not know I was on the spectrum. I didn't understand myself when I read it. That would have been in my teen years. I don't know. I mean, I'd have to go back and reread it. I will say, though, that there are some classic works of science fiction and fantasy that, you can read that are definitely in a neurodivergent bent. I do know Philip K. Dick's, many of his works, just because of, how the life he led, and he had what they called a mental breakdown, and then that he called a religious experience. So you can read many of his works and see a very neurodivergent view and take on the world. In fact, I pulled it because I keep it at my desk. His exegesis, how do you say it? Exegesis is basically his attempt to get to the truth of what he experienced, what he called his religious experience, although others, I think, would term it a different way. But I couldn't speak on the lathe of heaven. I apologize. It's just been so long since I've read it.
No problem.
I think one thing to remember here is there is a lot of different ways of being neurodivergent. I mean, it's not to talk about it sometimes as though it's all autism. And unfortunately, we all are autistic on this panel, even if a lot of us are also other things. But people can have a very different form of neurodivergence, or they can have a very different experience, which in many ways is, not autism. But at the same time, there can still be this feeling of solidarity, like, oh, we're all treated in these not great ways because we think differently. And that's something all neurodivergent people have in common. And so we really can, I think, relate to each other's stories, even if we don't share the specific type or diagnosis or symptoms.
Right. So someone actually just asked that question as well. Do you think that happens? And absolutely, I think not only as people do we kind of tend to group together, but we see other readers will be like, oh yes, they understand what I mean. We got one more question from YouTube before we go back to the other questions. This one's from Nikki DeCasta. Do you think that writing is a way of controlling the world through your world, basically, organizing chaos, so to speak? Maya, let's start with you on that one.
I think that's a very good question. I think for me, I think my writing is very much an exploration. I've figured out so many things about myself because I wrote them first, and I came out to myself as bi because I wrote my Ayala Storm series. I think that I'm not sure if it's an attempt necessarily to control, but maybe it is, because at the same time I say that, but I wrote Sam Sylvester because I wanted to write the kind of book that I wish I'd had when I was Sam. And I think that, especially because a lot of us do have comorbidities, I've got CPTSD, anxiety, depression, which I feel like a lot of those are sort of byproducts of living in a world that's quite hostile to autistic people, and trying to survive it, because definitely you get anxiety if you're always having to mask, because when you are yourself, the world slaps you down. But so I do think, to an extent, sometimes I process things by putting them in fiction, because I want sometimes to give my characters the things that I personally have not had. So Sam has this wonderful, loving father who chose them, who constantly chooses them, who does everything in his power to make Sam's life what he believes Sam's life should be, which is safe and caring and full of acceptance and love. And Sam, has trauma in their past, but they are given space to experience their recovery and to go through all those different things, and find peace within themselves. And I think that that's definitely a theme in what I do. My next YA really centers around the idea that many of us feel monstrous, and are told that we are monstrous, whether it's, you know, I am going to call it Joyce Carol Oates for this, because she said that autistic people don't have empathy on Twitter. She like literally tweeted that. And so, you know, we have this sort of perception about us that is that, and that we don't have feelings, and that we don't empathize with people, and that we just are, you know, but monstrous. And so I wanted to engage with that, because that's something that doesn't come from within us. It's something that's put onto us. And so I think that, yeah, when I'm writing, particularly when I'm explicitly writing an autistic character, I think a lot of me is pouring in some of the darkness that I've experienced in my life, but also ways through that and ways of healing, and, you know, finding a quiet space in the darkness where one can actually realize, no, I'm actually okay. This isn't a me problem. I'm all right as I am. And I think that that's an important role of fiction for.
Yeah, definitely. And the thing about empathy and feelings is something that really, really annoys me. And my son is autistic. He's 5, it's interesting seeing his journey as a child, you know, to see like people trying to teach him, no, don't do this, don't express yourself this way, don't do it this way. And I think a lot of people like us, we have very big feelings, we have very big empathy, and we have very big emotions. But what the problem was, we had struggled regulating those. And I think when we get, as children, we're told, don't react like this, don't do this, don't do this. And that's why we kind of smother them a lot of the times, because we say, well, hang on, we can't say this to this person, we can't do this, we can't react in this way. And I think that's where a lot of like the anxiety and depression and everything comes from the masking as well. So that's a really great answer. Connor, how about you? Do you find yourself putting order on chaos through your writing in your own world?
I don't even know. I'm still thinking about it, because like I've always lived too much in my own head. So on some level, just putting that on the page just kind of made sense to me. Part of the reason I got started even writing anything was I remember I had read a comic book and I was really disappointed with the ending. So I just tried to rewrite the ending, and then decided that was fun, so I just kept doing it. So I think a lot of the time it's just sort of like, it started from a point of like, this makes more sense to me from the way I see the world, and just sort of progressed from there. I do think it's sort of both an attempt to be like, here I am, here's what I've got going on, and an attempt to sort of work out what that even is. And a lot of the time I've found, at least, that through doing that, there's a lot of people who have reacted to be like, I've never seen this side of myself in like a book before. That's always like a pleasant little experience, you know?
Yeah. Jason, we'll go with you there next.
I mean, one reason I fell in love with science fiction and fantasy is I used stories to really understand the world and people and all of that. I mean, I still can remember vivid things I read when I was young that goes, oh, that's why people do that, you know? So, yeah, so I see the world in some ways through stories totally, because that's what worked for me. Not everybody, you know, but that's what worked for me, you know? And I, yeah, so I keep it simple. I see the world in stories, and stories is how I understand it.
Stories are nice. You can close them and put them down at some points as well when you get too much. Ada, how about you?
I really don't think I would talk about it in terms of like control or imposing order, because my stories surprise me all the time. Like I'll be writing and I'm like, oh, I didn't think that was going to go there, or like, oh, you know, I had this event planned, but I didn't realize, you know, all the feelings and reactions that everyone was going to have to the event. And it's always surprising me. But I think that my experience is very similar to Maya's, in terms of I'm always like emotionally processing things through fiction. I'm always kind of using what I write to help make my own feelings make sense. And even when I don't consciously intend to, like something will just come out, and then I'll look back on it later when I've written the draft, and I'll be like, oh, that's what I was feeling like, you know.
Okay, so we've kind of like, you know, a lot of the kind of questions, the final question we're going to go do is talk about but you know, finding yourself, neurodiversity in your work, which we've kind of touched on a little bit. A few, and I know some people on the panel, I think maybe everyone on the panel was kind of diagnosed a little bit later in life. Forgive me if that's incorrect. I've seen
I was like medium, I was like 13.
Right, okay.
I was diagnosed as like at 7.
Okay, so like I think it's
Maybe a little earlier, I might be forgetting.
Yeah, we're kind of halfway of a split then, I
Without
think.
going into too much detail, because it's highly personal, but my family knew when I was a very young child and hid it from me so that I would be forced to learn to mask and be neurotypical, although those words weren't known then.
Oh, wow. That's sorry to
I
hear
have
that.
feelings on that.
Yeah, definitely, yeah. But so the question I had, we've kind of touched on a little bit, so I wanted to kind of change it a little bit for in terms of yourself, Jason, 'cause I think you can probably relate to this, and Maya especially, and if Connor and Ada have any thoughts on this, just do jump in. You both kind of talked about finding yourself in stories and finding certain things in stories, and did writing help you with your self kind of diagnosis and your journey into finding your identity? Was that something that was a big spur for you both to kind of look into more about yourself?
I think one of the things that set me personally on the route to self-diagnosis was I was sort of mentoring someone who was wanting to write sort of personal essays, and she wrote about her daughter who had just been diagnosed as autistic. And I had this moment where I was reading this essay and I had to like stop and walk away, because I felt like I like literally felt like someone was taking the piss out of me, like, because it just was so it was literally my life. It was my life, my experiences, all these different things, and that sort of kicked it off. I'd had some sort of inklings, I think, before that, but it was definitely that. And so it wasn't so much books, I think, or fiction, but it was something else but it was someone's writing about it that made me sort of notice. And yeah, I think especially because I think most of us are probably in our 30s, 40s, I'm not sure. And so when we were younger, we had like Rain Man, and there weren't very many there wasn't much variety, and there wasn't, and still isn't, like a very good understanding of what autism looks like across genders, across races. Like there's just still so much that we're way behind on. So it was, I think that, did I even answer the question, or did I?
A little bit. Oh, no. No, you did, yeah, because you found it in the essay, and I mean, did you start exploring this in your writing before you had the formal diagnosis, or was it?
Yeah,
yeah.
I actually wrote the first draft of Sam Sylvester in 2017, and I was diagnosed in 2021. So, and I think that Sam was a lot of me processing that, and yeah, and especially because I got my diagnosis in the process of editing the book in 2020, 2021. So I think definitely that influenced like how I went back through and leaned into a lot of aspects that I'd sort of been like waffling on. So
Jason, how about yourself with that one?
Well, like I said, my family knew, although the terms were maybe different when I was young, hid it from me, which in hindsight, it took me a long time to realize that, into my 20s and 30s, and, I'd had hints along the way. So my but then eventually, figured it out and talked to them, and they're like, oh yeah, I did this and that. And I'm like, I'll be working all that into stories in the future. Let me just say, it's still tough.
Yeah. Well, that's the great thing. I mean, and I think something that we can all kind of relate to, and we'll start with Ada on this one, is do you find the writing process in general, and not just in terms of neurodiversity or anything like that, but do you find it cathartic to kind of delve into it? And for me, writing is my happy place. It's like a little cocoon that I can go to and just, do what I want to do, and it can be quiet or whatever I want it to be. But the actual process of it, obviously, sometimes we tackle some very difficult aspects in our work. But is it something that you find cathartic and something that helps you kind of, with your everyday kind of life?
Yes, absolutely. And there are times when I'm feeling like not good or upset, and I'm like, I know what I have to do. I have to just go and like write some stuff like to get some feelings out. It's a major coping mechanism for me.
Excellent, that's good. Connor, how about you? Is it something, because obviously writing is hard as well, but it's just the thing as well. It's tough. It's not easy. It's why not everyone does it, and not everyone can do it. But is it something that you find a release from and helps you, get through your day?
100%. Yeah, it's I actually noticed the first time I started including autistic characters in any of my work was around the time. So I should back up. I was diagnosed as like a child, and I got on, like, in retrospect, probably way too much medication, and had therapy and everything. And because of that, for like up until like my early 20s, I was like, well, I mean, I got everything. I'm all better. I'm fixed. And I never wrote a character that was like autistic, because I just figured there was nothing to interrogate there. And then a couple of years ago, when I was like 22 or 23, I realized, like, wait a minute, there's still like a lot of stuff I still have to navigate, and I have not unpacked that. What am I doing? And so a lot of the stuff I write now is just like an attempt to unpack just anything I've neglected, and that can be just a really cathartic thing to do, just to process everything. It's like giving yourself that free time to process everything that you've been through.
Maya, saying to you, but first we need to check, is the rock and the cat okay?
Yeah, my emotional support honey calcite palm stone is okay, and my little Tara, say hello.
Oh my god,
She's
did
good. Yeah, good.
A well-trained cat.
She's great. They got me through this pandemic, so yeah, I definitely think that it's been really cathartic for me, and also I think two parts of this. One is, I mentioned that I wrote Sam Sylvester while I was getting my formal diagnosis, and a big part of why I sought formal diagnosis was I was being harassed by someone very personally, talking about how I was lying about being autistic, and then my first experience with getting a formal diagnosis was with someone who literally hadn't read even 5-year-old research on gender differences within autism, and she's told me to my face that because I desired social connections, that I couldn't possibly be autistic, which I think that everyone here will just like want to lie down on the floor face down at the thought of. And so that was something that just gave me a lot of rage and trauma. And I ended up finding a private clinician who specialised in CPTSD and in autism and ADHD. And she, like, within an hour of speaking to me, she was like, I can tell you that you react like an autistic person who's been traumatized. Like, that's how your reactions work. And this is a common morbidity, so, or comorbidity. So it's anyway, so I know that a lot of that came out when I was doing the revision process on Sam, because we also got a lot of rejections on the book that were really ableist. And I know I've told Ada about a couple of these, but someone rejected the book saying that Sam wasn't autistic enough. and that was something. So and I think
an editor that said he's not autistic enough because he's not like the character on Atypical.
yeah,
Right.
that was it. That was exactly it. That did not help
My head is still exploding years later from that story. Yeah.
Yeah, that was, I think that did go viral on Twitter, didn't it? Because I told Ada and we sort of put it on Twitter anonymously. But yeah, so having the people respond to this book the way they have, like, I get messages several times a week from teen readers who, like, I'm having an emotion, who tell me that this is the first time they've seen themselves in a book that was for them, and that they, like, that it meant something to them, and that's all I ever wanted. That's the dream. I can stop now. I'm done. I'm not going to stop, but I'm just, yeah.
Yeah, don't stop. Keep going. Yeah. Jason.
I mean, writing for me is I have to do it. It's part of who I am. Like I said, I understand the world and came to understand the world and people through stories to a large degree. And but it's also, it can be painful, it can be difficult. But then at other times it can be wonderful. I mean, I have the range of, emotions and as I'm writing sometimes. And, I guess I think when I'm writing an original draft, the first draft, it's difficult, and and it can be I keep coming back to it and keep just push through it. But then when I'm revising, and reworking, that's where it's golden, so it's just it. But sometimes that changes too. It's a range. It's a spectrum.
So we're coming up to the end of our time, unfortunately, but we do have before we say our goodbyes and where everyone can find each other, we do have a question from Kirk McDougall on YouTube, where he wants to know where he can meet other neurodiverse writing professionals. So I was just wondering if there is any obviously you can always reach out to any of us. We'd be happy to have you, but is there anywhere, any kind of like writing support groups for neurodiverse people that any of you people go to or know of? If not, we should start one.
Yes, we should. My
experience usually have that. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, after you.
In my experience, usually there isn't one. You usually just have to sort of befriend the right person, and then they'll let you into some sort of secret Discord that they have with a bunch of other people where you can talk about your struggles and shit.
That's pretty much what I was about to say. Is it's people I know who've kind of like, hey, oh, you are, and kind of pull you in. And I wish there was something more public. I got to be honest. One reason there's not something so public is the harassment is out there. So, and you see that all over the place, or, especially on Twitter, which Twitter is a godsend, but, the harassment is there. So, yeah, I don't know how you would do that without, yeah.
It's really tough in public spaces, especially when, like we're like, some of us are in Scotland, some of us are in on the other side of the Atlantic in Canada and the US, and I don't know where you are, Dave.
I'm in Ireland.
You're in Ireland, so yeah. So it can be tough, and I think that online it makes it a bit easier. But then again, there's finding the places that are public, and when the gate is like through socializing, that makes it a bit tough for folk like us, I think. But yeah, I think. I will say that in our genre, science fiction and fantasy conventions, like, because a lot of us are. I'm in a bunch of different Discords, and and it didn't happen on purpose, but we tend to clump.
Yes,
agreed. The genre, it has a lot of neurodivergent people in it, and that's a wonderful thing. It can also be, sometimes it causes people to go, well, you're not my type of neurodivergent, so there's something wrong with you. And but overall, it's great. And I saw in the chat, someone said the WorldCon neurodivergent writer group starts here. I love that. You know, there needs to be more support in groups to discuss this. That's one reason I'm so excited that we did this panel.
Excellent, yeah, and I'm sure, Kirk, if you ever do want to chat with any of us, I think we're going to tell you all where you can find us all pretty soon. So just reach out. But yeah, our group sounds good. I like it. But it's true about the conventions. There's always we all find each other at some point, or end up sitting next to each other in a panel like one of these kind of panels, which is always great as well. So yeah, I think that is pretty much where we're going to be ending the panel for today. Thank you everyone for coming to watch us and coming to join and sit on the panel, and to Pam, our tech, as well. So we'll go around and tell everyone where we can, where you can all be found, if anyone wants to reach out. So Ada, starting with you, where's the best place to find you?
Well, you can find my website, adahoffman.com. This has information about all my books and all the stories and poems I've published, as well as the Autistic Book Party Review Series, which tells you about a lot of different autistic books, both good and bad. You can also find me at my Substack, which is called Everything is True, where I just talk about neurodivergence and fiction and psychology and the nature of reality. So
excellent. Thank you so much for coming on. Maya, how about you?
So you can find me on, I'm still on Twitter, but mostly in a sort of updates only capacity. I've pulled back a lot from social media in general, but I have the same name across all of my pen names for these. I am, it's the Gaelic word for hair, like hippity hoppity. So it's Mayach, I'm putting it in the chat just now. That's me on Instagram, Twitter, and the TikTok. And I also am at myamacgregor.com. And yeah, I think that's me.
Excellent. Thanks for coming on so much. Connor, how about you?
I am at the CM Caplan at Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Mastodon, whatever places are out there. That's probably going to be the username that I'm using. And you can find my books on Amazon, I guess.
Yeah, good old Amazon. And Jason, last but not least.
Yeah. My website, www.jasonsanford.com. I'm on, and if you want to find me, I'll give my Twitter address, Jason Sanford, at Jason Sanford on Twitter. And at the very top is a post with everything, links to all the other places, including on Mastodon and all the other, hey, we're running away from Twitter locations. So that would be it.
Yeah.
And you can check out my genre Grapevine too.
Yes.
Great.
Yes. Yeah.
Thanks.
And I'm David Green. You can find me Linktree/David Green Writer. That has all of my stuff wherever I lurk. Also, my newsletter has my address on it, which I can't get rid of. So if you actually want to come and visit me in my house, just sign up to my newsletter and turn up at the door. I would be amazed if someone ever did that. I wouldn't even be annoyed. It'd be fantastic. Thanks everyone for joining us today. We've got a few more things coming up with Glasgow 2024 as well. But first, thank you to everyone in the webinar, everyone on YouTube for watching, all the panelists, Pam, our wonderful tech, for hosting us today as well. We will have a fan table for Glasgow 2024 at EasterCon, which is going to be at Birmingham Hilton Metropole over Easter weekend 2023. So do come and say hello to us there, and there'll be other people that are at the on the table that will be there too, that are part of Glasgow 2024. We also have some upcoming events on YouTube. We have Eat My Speculative Shorts coming up, which I have been dreading saying the entire time, but I said it okay. On the 1st, we have our romance in science fiction and fantasy panel coming up on the 16th of February. If you're feeling extra romantic that week, go and check it out. And obviously we have our socials for all our exciting announcements coming up. And also, if you feel like you're very enthusiastic about Glasgow in general, or about conventions that are in Glasgow in 2024, please volunteer. We're always looking for volunteers, and you can reach out to us on all the socials and put your hand up and say, yes, we would like to help So that is us for this panel. Thank you everyone again for joining us. We hope you had a great time, and we will see you all soon.
Bye.
You all.
Sit quietly, wait for it to finish.